Most people believe that seeing too much is an advantage, that perceiving what others do not is a gift, a superior intelligence, a silent blessing. But Carl Jung, in his decades immersed in the deepest layers of the human psyche, understood something that almost no one wants to accept. Those who see beyond appearances are not rewarded with clarity. They are condemned to a loneliness that has no translation. Because seeing what others ignore is not a privilege. It is a burden that no one around you can carry with you. And Machiavelli, centuries earlier, had described exactly the same phenomenon with a coldness that still disturbs us today. He who observes human nature as it truly is can never again go back to pretending he didn't see it. You notice the pauses before the lies. You notice the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You notice when praise hides envy, when concern disguises control, when affection has a schedule. You notice that people say one thing with their mouths and something completely different with their bodies. And while the world around you continues to function within its comfortable illusions, you exist in a strange place, where real communication happens in the silences, in the micro-movements, in the contradictions that no one else notices. This is not paranoia. It is not excessive sensitivity. It is expanded consciousness. And Jung explained why this consciousness hurts so much, because the ordinary human mind needs illusion to function. When you begin to see through it, you don't become smarter. You become unbearably alone. Think of a seemingly ordinary dinner party. The family gathered, the table set, conversations flowing on a polite surface. While everyone eats peacefully, you register unintentionally the father who interrupts the mother for the third time without realizing it. The sister who pulls her son by the arm a little harder than the situation requires. The brother-in-law who laughs at a joke but whose eyes remain tense. The silence of an aunt when a certain name is mentioned. No one else notices. Everyone continues chewing. But you have just watched in 3 minutes an entire film of unspoken conflicts that have dragged on for decades. And when someone asks why you are quiet, you make up an excuse that you are tired, because explaining what you just saw would be asking for that entire table to collapse. So you swallow it, and you take the reading inside. It is this systematic swallowing, year after year, that slowly forms what Jung would call the observer's burden. The classic mistake is to believe that this lucidity is a defect, that you need to be less intense, not read too much into things, trust people more. Modern culture worships naivety and calls it optimism. It punishes perception and calls it negativity. But Jung never believed in this theater. For him, most people spend their entire lives sleeping with their eyes open, protected by a psychological fog that prevents reality from hurting too much. He who sees through this fog is not abnormal. He is simply someone in whom the collective defense mechanism has failed. And this failure, as painful as it may be, is the first symptom of something rare, a soul beginning to wake up. Then comes the second layer, the one almost no one has the courage to look at. Jung said that every human being builds from childhood a psychological mask he called the persona. The persona is what you show the world to be accepted, hired, loved, tolerated. It is not conscious falsity. It is survival engineering. You learned, while still small, that certain parts of you generated praise and others generated rejection. So you stored the rejected parts in an internal basement and began to display only the approved ones. The child who laughed too loudly learned to be more contained. The one who asked too many questions learned to be silent. The one who felt too much learned to perform balance. And over time, this performance became so automatic that you yourself forgot you were acting. The problem is that the highly perceptive person does not only see their own mask, they see the masks of everyone around them. And they see when the masks slip. They see the exact moment the manager performs concern while calculating layoffs. They see the relative who smiles at dinner and disdains behind backs. They see the friend who celebrates your victory with a hint of bitterness in the corner of their voice. It is not your malice that sees this. It is that the masks of others were never made for people with X-ray vision. They were made for other masks. And here appears the antithesis that Jung would whisper in his office with the calm of someone delivering a definitive diagnosis. It is not that people lie to you, it is that they lie to themselves first. and then offer you an edited version of that lie as if it were their truth. You are not being deceived. You are being protected from the emotional fragility they cannot sustain alone. And this is the exhaustion that almost no one can explain. That feeling of coming back from a family dinner in Greenwich, a business meeting in Manhattan, or a gathering with friends in London, and feeling like you are carrying 20 extra pounds on your soul. This is not introversion. It is not social fatigue. It is the exhaustion of performing a diplomatic version of yourself while processing, at the same time, all the masks that fell in front of you. You weren't just participating in the conversation, you were reading 3 layers of it in silence. And this reading has a cost. All perception has a cost. And that is exactly why so many people with this sensitivity end up getting sick in environments where no one else seems to get sick. They are not living in the same environment as the others. They are living in its subtext. That is why I prepared the awakening code for you. If this exhaustion of perceiving too much has accompanied you for years, if you have come to doubt your own sanity for seeing what no one else wants to see, this material is not motivational. It is not a cheap illusion. It is an inner map based on the psychology of Carl Jung, divided into 60 days of daily lessons, with keys, questions, and declarations that lead you from silent restlessness to clear direction. It's not about stopping the perception, it's about stopping being destroyed by what you perceive. Access is in the first pinned comment below this video. If you recognize this pain, write "I see" in the comments, not as a slogan, as a mark of the moment you decided to stop pretending you didn't see. Jung called individuation the process by which a person stops being a reflection of collective expectations and begins to become what they truly are. It sounds beautiful when said like that in a diluted self-help book. But in practice, individuation is one of the most brutal journeys a human being can go through, because it requires you to dismantle one by one the layers of the mask you spent your whole life building. And every layer you take off, someone around you complains. Someone misses the previous version. Someone accuses you of having changed. Someone tries to call you back to the old character, because that is where that person learned to fit you in. The path of individuation, therefore, is not lonely because you are cold or arrogant. It is lonely because most people fell in love with your character, not with you. When you abandon the character, the audience disperses. And this is not a moral tragedy. It is a structural cleanup. Jung understood that a good part of our relationships is not based on love. It is based on unconscious psychological contracts. I offer you the version of me that accommodates you, and you offer me the version of you that accommodates me. And both of us protect ourselves from each other's truth. The day you break the contract, the other feels as if you have betrayed something sacred. You didn't. You just stopped sacrificing your soul to keep someone else's mask intact. And here the loneliness of awakening shows its true anatomy. It is not the loneliness of someone who has been abandoned. It is the loneliness of someone who refuses to continue lying out of politeness. You sit at the same table with the same people as always, but you realize you can no longer laugh at the same shallow jokes. You try to take an interest in the conversations that used to fill your week and feel a thin, almost imperceptible, but irreversible repulsion. It's not that these people have gotten worse. It's that you have ceased to be useful as a mirror of their alienation. And deep down, that's what they find most strange about you. Not your change, but the fact that your presence now forces each of them to remember what they are avoiding facing. And there is an even more uncomfortable detail in this phase. You begin to realize that many people around you do not want you to get better. Not consciously, of course. No one wakes up in the morning formulating the thought of sabotaging someone they love. But there is a silent psychological mechanism that Jung identified with precision. Every evolution of yours forces the other to face their own stagnation. When you start setting boundaries, those who benefited from your lack of boundaries react. When you start speaking your mind, those who got used to your silence take offense. When you start choosing yourself, those who had you as a resource available 24 hours a day feel abandoned. And in an almost invisible movement, they try to pull you back to the old place. Not with violence, with guilt. With phrases like, "You've changed, you're being weird, you're different," said in a tone that feigns concern but carries at its core a request. Go back to being the one who served me better. Recognizing this dynamic is painful but liberating, because those who truly love you celebrate your growth even if they lose access to your old version. The cruel part of this process is that no one warns you. No one tells you when individuation begins that you are going to lose people you loved, that there will be nights when your bed seems larger and emptier than the room itself, that you will look at your past with a mixture of gratitude and disgust, because now you see clearly how high a price you paid to belong to places that were never yours. Jung said that individuation is the only path to a true life, but he never promised it would be comfortable. He promised, however, that it would be real. And reality, for a soul that has spent decades anesthetized, stings like iodine on an open wound. And it is exactly at this point that Machiavelli enters the psychological scene, even though he wrote centuries before Jung. Because while Jung delved into the internal structure of the soul, Machiavelli mapped, with almost surgical coldness, the external structure of human behavior. He was not the stereotypical cynic that common sense invented. He was an implacable observer of patterns. And his most uncomfortable teaching is this: never judge a person by what they say. Judge them by what they repeatedly do, especially when they think no one is paying attention. Words are performance. Action is confession. And most people live deluded, because they insist on hearing the words of others as if they were contracts, when in truth they were never more than packaging. There is a scene that repeats in almost everyone's life, but which only the observer registers in real time. Someone promises you they will be present at an important moment, and on the day they fail, with an excuse that sounds reasonable. A few days later, this same person fails again in another context, with another equally reasonable excuse. Months later, the third absence. Individually, each excuse is acceptable. Added together, they are a silent confession. That person does not prioritize you. They never will. And while the majority continues asking for the next chance, the Machiavellian observer has already understood. He stops demanding presence. He adjusts the relationship. He repositions. He doesn't necessarily cut ties, but he never again deposits trust in the place where it has already been proven that emotional currency sinks. The person who learns to read the world through this lens stops being surprised by betrayals, not because they become paranoid, but because they stop denying signs. They notice, weeks before, that someone is pulling away by the micro-tone of the voice, by the delay in responses, by the absence of curious questions about their life. They notice, months before a partnership collapses, that the business partner is already making moves to prepare an exit. They notice in small attitudes, when a relationship has lost its axis, even if both still pretend to hold things together. This is not toxic distrust. It is strategic lucidity. And this is where Jung and Machiavelli, even coming from seemingly opposite worlds, meet. Both understood that the truth about a human being is never in what they project. It is in the pattern they repeat when they believe they are safe. The mistake of the beginning observer is to use this clarity as an accusation. It is to point the finger, try to convince others of what they see, try to prove the hidden intentions of someone for whom they prefer to remain blind. Jung would have said that this is an infantile attempt to force the collective consciousness to wake up. Machiavelli would have said, with a melancholy smile, that this is politically disastrous. The person who sees too much must learn a rare discipline, to see in silence, to keep the reading, to adjust the strategy, to let each person reveal themselves in their own time. Because human nature, when it is not interrupted, always confesses, and it is up to the observer to be attentive at the moment it confesses, without needing to denounce anything. The power of perception is not in exposing, it is in positioning. If you have made it this far, and something inside your chest recognized these descriptions as if they were descriptions of your own life, hold on to this moment. It was for you that I prepared the awakening code. It's not a course, it's not a miracle, it's not motivation. It is a daily path based on Jung to transform your perception into sovereignty. Access is in the first pinned comment, and if you delay, you will continue knowing everything and living little. Choose today, because that is what almost no one understands about the highly perceptive mind. It does not rest. While an ordinary person can leave an environment and switch off mentally, the observer takes the entire environment inside. He relives the conversation, revisits the facial expression of that colleague, questions the intention behind that seemingly innocent phrase, crosses data, compares behaviors, reorganizes the puzzle. It is not obsession, it is processing. His brain was trained from very early on to interpret the world in several simultaneous layers, probably because at some point in his personal history, understanding the subtext was literally a matter of emotional survival. Many relentless observers come from childhoods where they had to learn to read their parents' moods, like someone reading a weather forecast, where they had to decode heavy silences to know if they would be ignored or attacked, where they became experts in anticipating the emotional climate of a house, even before opening the door. Jung would say that this child developed, out of necessity, a sensitivity that most adults will never reach. But the price of this sensitivity, when it is not integrated into adulthood, is chronic vigilance. It is an inability to let one's guard down. It is the body permanently switched on in a silent alert mode that no one around sees. And even more painful is the loneliness of feeling that everything you say needs to be explained 3 times, that your intuitions seem like exaggerations to those who don't see what you see, that your concerns, when you try to share them, sound paranoid to those who prefer the convenience of denial. You learn over time to filter what you say, to hide half of what you perceive, to swallow internal alerts because you're tired of being called dramatic. And every swallowed alert becomes a stone inside your chest. Jung had a name for this: the shadow. Not only the shadow of what is ugly in us, but the shadow of everything that needed to be put away so that coexistence was possible. Swallowed anger, censored perception, hidden ambition, ignored boundaries. Things stored like this do not die. They leak, like inexplicable fatigue, like impatience with those you love, like a grey sadness that appears on Sunday afternoons and you don't know where it comes from. There is also a physical symptom that almost no one associates with this condition, but Jung sensed it. The body of the relentless observer ages on the inside at a different pace. The hands may be at rest, but the chest remains tense. Sleep comes, but in shallow layers. You wake up tired without having made any effort, because the nocturnal mind continued processing conversations, re-editing scenes, trying to fit that person's last strange remark into their larger pattern of behavior. It is like living with a second brain working in silence, even while the first tries to rest. And over time, this silent exhaustion is interpreted by ordinary doctors as generalized anxiety, mild depression, burnout. Clinical names that describe the symptoms but never reach the root. The root is different. You are tired of carrying alone a level of consciousness that no one around you sees exists. Jung's task was never to erase this shadow. It was to integrate it, to accept that it is a legitimate part of the soul, to bring into the light what society taught you to hide and restore to these contents the right to exist. The person who integrates the shadow ceases to be a hostage to it. They stop being sabotaged by their own unconscious. They stop acting in a way contrary to what they desire. They stop being exhausted by maintaining an impeccable image while dying inside. Integrating the shadow does not make you dark, it makes you whole. And the whole person is the one who can finally walk without the weight of 2 identities, the public and the secret. Therein lies the next stage, and it is the most delicate. Because a person who begins to see everything if they do not educate themselves emotionally runs a silent risk, transforming lucidity into superiority. They begin to look at others with a hint of disdain. They begin to categorize who is asleep and who is awake. They begin to feel intellectually above the masses. And here Jung would make a long, almost melancholy pause to remind us that this arrogance is just another mask, perhaps the most sophisticated of all. It is the ego taking refuge in perception as it previously took refuge in approval. It is not evolution. It is displacement. You traded the hunger for acceptance for the hunger to feel special, and the second is more silent, but equally a prison. The mature path is different. It is to perceive that most people are not being mean. They are being human at the level of consciousness they manage to reach. They use their masks because they were taught to believe that without a mask, they are not lovable. They lie to themselves because the truth would be too painful to carry without internal structure. They hurt without knowing because they never learned to deal with their own pain. This does not force you to endure everything. It does not force you to remain in relationships that drain you, but it forces you to a new choice, to see without judging, to withdraw without hating, to decide without becoming contaminated. Machiavelli, whom so many accuse of being cold, offers a powerful clue here. He stated in essence that understanding human nature does not mean despising it. It means ceasing to demand from it what it cannot deliver. If you expect loyalty from someone who has never demonstrated loyalty to anything, you will suffer. If you expect transparency from someone who survives on masks, you will suffer. If you expect depth from someone who only learned to live on the surface, you will suffer. Pain does not come from human nature. It comes from our unrealistic expectations of it. The mature observer adjusts expectations. He doesn't cut off affection. He adjusts expectations. And by doing so, he stops being a victim of patterns that were already predictable. At this point, perception stops being a condemnation and becomes wisdom. You begin to relate to the world like someone relating to the weather, understanding seasons, predicting rains, knowing when to take shelter and when to expose yourself. You no longer personalize the winters of others. You are no longer hurt by the natural coldness of someone who never learned to warm up. You no longer confuse immaturity with malice. And above all, you stop expecting the other to make the internal journey that only you decided to make. Each one walks in their own time, and accepting this is one of the most compassionate acts an awakened soul can perform. Real compassion here is not accepting everything. It is understanding what each person can offer and stopping demanding miracles from those who are still asleep. If every sentence so far seems to describe your inner life, stop. Breathe. Recognize what you are feeling. You are not a rare case. You are a delayed case, and delaying further will not bring you any inner peace. The awakening code exists exactly for you to cross this passage without getting lost on the way. It is 60 days, one lesson per day, with questions, keys, and declarations inspired by the deep psychology of Carl Jung. It's not for you to learn about Jung. It's for you to apply Jung within yourself, in the exact place where the pain lives. Access is in the first pinned comment of this video. If you close this tab now, tomorrow you will continue knowing too much and living too little. And the distance between what you know and what you live is the only real hell. The choice is yours. Make it today. And we come to the point that changes everything, to what Jung would call, with his surgical serenity, inner sovereignty, and which Machiavelli would describe as the true form of power, that which does not depend on an audience. The sovereign person is not the one who shouts the loudest, not the one who dominates a room, not the one who displays achievements. It is the one who has reached a silent state where the validation of others has lost weight, where the opinion of the other is just information, not a verdict, where loneliness has ceased to be absence and has become their own presence. This person doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to convince anyone, doesn't need to perform balance, because they simply are. And here is the final inversion. The loneliness you feared so much was not the problem. It was the portal. It was the internal space that needed to be emptied so that something larger could occupy it. Without this loneliness, you would remain dependent on the gaze of others. Without this lack of understanding, you would remain diluted in voices that were never yours. Without this painful lucidity, you would continue sleeping comfortably in a life that only seemed to be yours. Every loss on this journey was in truth a cleanup. Every person who moved away opened space for you to breathe more deeply. Every mask that fell revealed traits that were waiting to be recognized. You didn't lose. You were returned to yourself. And it is here that Jung would whisper the last truth. He who masters his own mind ceases to need to master anything else, because he who has anchored himself in his own center can no longer be displaced by opinions, by praise, by attacks, by rejections. The storm continues happening out there, but it no longer moves you. And from this point on, your perception ceases to be a burden and becomes a compass. You use what you see to choose who you live with, what you accept, where you go. You no longer expose what you see. You position yourself based on what you see, and that changes absolutely everything, because an observer who positions himself in the right place is practically untouchable. Inner sovereignty in practice manifests in small and definitive things. You stop needing to reply to messages immediately to prove you care. You stop needing to justify your choices to people who would never make the same ones. You stop participating in discussions whose only objective was to test your patience. You stop accepting meetings, gatherings, invitations, conversations that steal your energy without giving anything back. And no one understands where this new firmness came from. Some admire it in silence. Others start calling you arrogant, distant, changed. And you realize, with a new calm, that these accusations are just the language of those who have lost power over you. The sovereign does not explain himself. He observes the accusation arrive and moves on. The silence, which used to hurt, now sustains. The absence of approval, which used to wound, now liberates. The distance from environments that no longer fit you ceases to be a reason for guilt and becomes proof that you finally have a center. Being the solitary genius was never about being abandoned. It was about being the only one capable of seeing without needing the consensus of the group. And there is a rare dignity in inhabiting this place without trying to convince anyone of it. The sovereign does not recruit followers. He just walks. And those who have eyes will see, those who don't will move on, and both paths are legitimate. What remains of this journey is this. You can close this video now and go back to pretending you don't know what you know. You can go back to swallowing alerts. You can go back to explaining yourself to those who have already decided not to understand you. You can go back to bending in the name of a peace that was always yours alone to sustain. Or you can accept once and for all that lucidity is here to stay, and that the only way out is not to run from it, but to walk with it, as one walks with a lit flame inside the chest. There is no going back. There is only the next step. The illusion that protected you has just been exposed, and from now on everything you do or stop doing will be, for the first time, a truly yours choice. Choose well.